Welcome to Green Dolphin Science.
And welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we're digging into something really quite fundamental. It's the ground beneath our feet.
Yeah, it's true. Usually when you talk plastic pollution, everyone thinks oceans, maybe rivers.
Right, but what's happening in the soil?
Exactly. So today we're taking a deep dive into a pretty recent scientific study that looks specifically at microplastic buildup in soils in Turkey.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack what this study found. You know, where are these microplastics actually showing up in Turkish soils?
And maybe why they're there, what factors are influencing it.
Yeah, and this source gives us a really interesting comparison between farmland and city areas.
So the study itself, it's a scientific paper published not too long ago in Science of the Total Environment.
Okay, and the researchers, they looked at 55 soil samples?
That's right, from three main regions in Turkey,
Mm-hmm.
the Mediterranean, Aegean, and Marmara.
And the split's interesting there, isn't it? 44 from agricultural land, but only 11 from urban spots.
Yeah, a definite skew towards agriculture in the sampling. And they didn't just, count particles. They really characterized them. Meaning, they looked at the amount, sure, but also shape, size, color, and crucially, what type of plastic it was. And then they compared all that between the farm soils and the urban ones.
Okay, right. So let's get straight to the first big finding. What's the headline here? Maybe the most striking part.
Well, the absolute main thing is they found microplastics in every single sample they tested.
Every single one, 100%.
100% detection rate across all 55 agricultural and urban sites in this study.
Wow. Okay, that says a lot right there about how pervasive this is. So was the quantity pretty consistent then?
Oh, not at all. Far from consistent. And that's really the next key finding. The overall average was around 180 particles per kilogram of dry soil.
Okay.
But they found significantly higher levels in the agricultural soils compared to the urban ones.
Higher on farms than in cities. According to this study, anyway.
That's what they found, yeah. Agricultural soils averaged around 193 particles per kilogram. Urban soils were quite a bit lower, about 127.
Mm-hmm.
And the range was huge. I mean, some farm sites had over 400 particles per kilo. Others were way down near 50.
Big difference.
Massive variability. Urban sites varied too, but generally stayed in that lower range. So, yeah, they're everywhere. But there are definite hotspots, and agriculture seems to be a major one based on this research.
That difference between the land uses feels really important. Okay, so they're everywhere, higher concentrations on farms. What did these things actually look like? What were they made of? Shape, color?
Right, let's break that down. So first, the material, the polymer type. Across all the samples, polyethylene, that's PE, was just dominant, overwhelmingly so.
PE, like in plastic bags and bottles.
Exactly. Almost 90% of all the microplastics they found were PE. Polypropylene, PP, was a distant second, around 8%, and polystyrene, PS, even lower.
And was that PE dominance true for both farm and city soils?
It was, yeah, though even more pronounced in the agricultural soils. Over 90% PE there, compared to maybe 78-ish% in the urban soils.
Okay, and why would PE and PP be so dominant, especially, in farming areas?
Well, that's where you start connecting the dots to the likely sources, right? PE and PP are like the workhorses of the plastic industry.
Right.
Used everywhere in packaging, sure, but really critical in agriculture, too. Think mulching films, greenhouse covers, ropes, bags.
Okay. So that finding really points a finger towards farming practices as a big source.
It strongly suggests that, yes, it fits the picture.
Makes sense. Okay, what about the shape? Were they finding little beads or shards or...
The shapes were interesting, too. Fibres were by far the most common shape overall. About 73% of everything they found.
Fibers?
Yeah, fibers. Then fragments were second, maybe 26%. And films were actually pretty rare, less than 1% overall.
Fibers, like from clothes washing.
That's one potential source, absolutely. Textiles, shedding fibers, which could end up in soil via, say, sewage, sludge, application, or even just falling from the air. Especially relevant for urban areas.
But
fibers can also come from the breakdown of larger plastic items. Think about ropes fraying, or films and bags getting brittle and fragmenting into fiber-like shapes over time. So it could be textiles or degrading agricultural plastics or both.
Got it. So fibers and fragments dominate. What about color? Was there a particular palette showing up?
Yeah, two colors really stood out, blue and black.
Blue and black.
Blue was the single most common color overall, nearly half of the particles.
Yeah.
And black was right behind it, almost 40%.
Huh. Any difference between the farm and city soils there?
Blue was number one in both, actually. But black was particularly common in the agricultural samples.
And again, you can sort of link that back to sources, right? Black plastic mulch.
Exactly. Black plastic mulching film is used a lot in agriculture, so finding lots of black fragments or fibers in farm soil, well, it fits. Blue could come from lots of things: packaging, maybe fishing gear fragments if near the coast, certain textiles.
Okay, so we've got type, shape, color. Let's talk size. Does the size of these plastic bits matter for how we should think about this problem?
Oh, size matters hugely, especially when you start thinking about ecological risks, potential health impacts.
Right.
And this study found that most of the microplastics were pretty small, less than 1,000 micrometers, which is 1 millimeter. About 2/3 fell into that category.
So smaller than a pinhead, most of them.
Pretty much. And if you break it down even more, over 40% were actually less than 500 micrometers. Tiny.
Half a millimeter.
Yeah. Interestingly, those smaller particles, the less than 500 micron ones, were found in slightly higher concentration in the urban samples compared to the agricultural ones.
Okay, why is finding these really small particles particularly concerning?
Well, generally speaking, smaller microplastics pose higher risks. They have a much larger surface area compared to their volume. Which means they can potentially absorb and sort of hitchhike more contaminants that might be in the soil, things like pesticides, heavy metals.
Okay.
Plus, their small size makes them available for ingestion by a wider range of soil organisms.
Yeah.
From microbes right up to earthworms. That's a pathway into the food web.
Right, introducing the plastic and whatever it's carrying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, these things stick around for hundreds of years, potentially just breaking down into smaller and smaller, even nano-sized pieces over time.
So not only are they everywhere, but a big chunk are in this size range that's particularly, problematic for the ecosystem.
Okay, let's try and connect the dots then. Why the higher levels in agricultural soils? What's driving that specifically?
The source really points strongly towards the sheer intensity of plastic use in modern agriculture, especially in Turkey. We mentioned it before. Plastic mulch films are huge.
For weeds and moisture, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Plus greenhouse covers, irrigation pipes, ropes for plants, bags for supplies. It all adds up.
And the study mentioned the difficulty in actually removing all that plastic afterwards, especially the mulch film.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Think about pulling up acres of thin plastic film after a harvest. It's laborious, it's expensive, it tears.
So a lot gets left behind.
A lot gets left behind, gets tilled into the soil, breaks down slowly over time, accumulating year after year. This study even hinted there might be a link between how long a site has used these plastic-intensive methods and how much MP they found.
And you add to that, the source noted a lack of standard regulations in Turkey specifically for dealing with this agricultural plastic waste.
Yeah, that's a critical point. If there aren't clear rules or easy, affordable ways to collect and properly dispose of or recycle this stuff, well, it ends up in the soil. That becomes the default.
Okay, so intensive use, hard to remove, lack of regulation seems like a perfect storm for agricultural soils. What about the urban sources again? Lower levels, but still present.
Right. Urban areas have their own pathways. You've got atmospheric depositions, think tire dust, fibers from clothes landing on the ground, degradation of plastic things in the urban environment like construction materials or street furniture, and just general litter, packaging waste, finding its way into soils through various routes.
So real sources, but in this study, they just didn't seem to add up to the same levels as the agricultural input.
In the areas they sampled, yes, that's what the data show.
Okay. Now, beyond just where the plastic comes from, did the study look at the soil itself? Like, does the type of soil affect where microplastics end up?
Yes, they did look into that. They did some statistical analysis looking for links between soil properties and the MP levels they measured.
And what did they find?
They found that things like soil texture, the amount of sand, silt, and clay seem to play a role.
How so?
Well, their analysis showed a positive correlation between microplastic abundance and size with the sand content of the soil.
So more sand, generally more MPs found.
That's the trend they saw. And conversely, they found negative correlations with the amount of clay and silt.
Meaning less clay or silt might also correlate with more MPs, or fewer MPs where there's more clay and silt.
Yeah, the latter. Fewer MPs seem to correlate with higher clay and silt content.
Interesting. Any ideas why?
The study doesn't pin down the exact mechanism, but it suggests maybe MPs move differently in different soil types. Perhaps they filter down more easily in coarser, sandy soils.
Or maybe they get trapped or more effectively in soils with more clay and organic matter, which tend to form stronger aggregates.
That's another possibility. Maybe sandy soils retain them less effectively. It just adds another layer, doesn't it? It's not just the source, but how the soil itself interacts with these particles.
Definitely. So the source, especially agriculture in this case, and the soil type itself are both major factors. What are the sort of broader implications here? What does this all mean?
Well, the big one is just reinforcing that soil is a really, really important place where microplastics end up, a major sink for this pollution.
Right. We focus on the oceans, but the land is accumulating it too.
Exactly. And these findings from Turkey really highlight the scale, particularly how intensive farming practices can drive that accumulation.
And the potential downsides of that accumulation.
Well, the source mentions potential negative impacts on soil health itself. Like, could these plastics change how soil holds together, how water moves through it, how organic matter functions?
Affecting fertility or structure long term.
Potentially. Then there are the risks to the creatures living in the soil, the whole soil ecosystem, and of course the question that always comes up.
If it's in the soil where our food grows.
Right. It naturally raises questions about potential pathways into the food chain. The study didn't measure that, but it's an obvious concern when you find MPs in agricultural soils. More research definitely needed there.
And it's important, like the authors say, to remember this is just one snapshot, right? One sampling period.
Absolutely. To really get the full picture, you need ongoing monitoring, bigger studies looking at changes over time. This is vital foundational work, though.
Yeah. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the big takeaways are that microplastics are pretty much everywhere in the Turkish soils they tested.
Yep, widespread.
Agricultural practices seem to be a major driver, leading to higher concentrations than in the urban areas sampled.
A significant difference there.
And the type of soil itself also plays a role in where these plastics end up and maybe how much accumulates.
It shows this hidden side of plastic pollution right there in the ground.
Which really brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. Given that we know microplastics are building up in the very soil that grows our food, supports our parks, our ecosystems, what does this accumulating plastic legacy truly mean for the long-term health and productivity of these absolutely critical environments?
And maybe what steps can actually be taken, from changing how we farm to better waste management, maybe even new materials. How do we address what's already there and slow down future accumulation?
A lot to think about looking down at our feet.
Indeed, a question that requires looking down, not just out.
Well said. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into soil microplastics.
Hope it gave you some food for thought.